Okay, thank you. So after we illustrate the requirements, you identify what the user needs and his expectation about your work. You need to analyze the requirements. You need to identify, okay, uh, what exactly the requirement means, how I can modeling, how can I can translate these requirements in a technical artifact, okay? And you try to translate what the user said in the model or the main objects, okay? You try to translate what the user said in the, you try to organize in a representation that you can use during the development, okay? To follow, you need to design the system. In this case, you need to organize the concepts that is in the domain. For example, you develop a video conference system. You have the video, record, chat, and you need to organize this idea. But in the system design, you start to create, to organize the ideas in components or system systems. For example, in the video conference, you have the app subsystem, you have the server system, you have the storage system, okay? You organize the system and subsystem. You go to detail design, where you, okay, you have the storage, but how the storage, how do you implement the storage? Okay, which company, which specific component you have in the storage that you need to implement? You go to the implementation and you need to test the things that you develop, okay? All the process, all the methodology that you use the 6 steps. What changes, depending on the methodology, the way that you use or the way that you implement this phase is a little different, okay? For example, in the Agile, Agile is an iterative process. In Agile, each iterative step, you implement all phase, okay? What is changed is the way that you test, the way that you implement, the way that you document the things, but you implement all the phase. If you use a rational uniform process, it's an old process. It's iterative, but you didn't implement all phases in all times. You have a little difference. But when you analyze and develop this life cycle, you need to implement the 6 phases, okay? But what is a requirement? A requirement is describe what you need to do, what the system needs to do, okay? But not only the functionalities, not only the features that the system has, but include in this definition the constraints on its operations. For example, I need to have security. The system needs to run in iPhone 7, or the system needs to run in iPhone and the Android. The system needs to run when you click the button, the system needs to provide an answer in 2 microseconds, okay? It's not only about the features, okay? Because the feature is, you need to, the system needs to add, for example, things in the calculator, okay? And a calculator app. The system needs to calculate, realize the operation, the additional operation, subtraction operation, division operation, and multiplication operation, okay? Multiply operation. Okay, these things is featured. What is the constraint? Okay, the application needs to run in the Android. The application needs to run in the iPhone. The application, when you click the button, the calculator button, the application needs to provide the answer in 2 microseconds. It's the constraint. It's not about the feature, it's about the constraint. When you talk about the requirements, you talk about what the system again. Okay. It's more okay. Okay. When you talk about the requirements, you need to talk about what the system needs to do and its constraints. Okay. Any questions you hear, guys? So you have two types of requirements. You have the function requirements and non-function requirements. The function requirements is about the features, okay? It's about the features, what the system needs to do, okay? And you talk about the what the system needs to provide, how the system should react, and the behavior that the system needs to have. Example of function requirements. One, the system must send a confirmation mail whenever an order is placed. Another requirement, the system must allow blog visitor to sign up for the newsletter by leaving their email. 3, the system must allow users to verify their accounts using their phone number. Okay? Think about these 3 examples. These 3 examples say just only talk about what the system needs to do. Okay? It's not about constraint. No, the system needs to do these features. Okay? And what is a non-function requirement? The non-function requirements is about the constraints. Okay? It's not about what the system needs to do, but the constraints to that the system needs to accomplish to perform the task that the system needs to do. Examples of non-function requirement, portability. For example, the system needs to run in the Mac, or the system needs to run in the Android. The system needs to run in the both systems. Security. Okay, the system needs to implement the system needs to be compliance, for example, to ISO 27001, for example. The system needs to be compliant to be compliant with the PCI. PCI is a standard to web transactions. Okay. Privacy. The system cannot store the username or any information that characterizes the user in the database. Or the system, before your system store the information in the database, the system needs to ask the user that he authorize or does not authorize to save the information in the database. Okay, it's a privacy requirement. Safety. The probability that you have a critical error in the system need to be below than 0.001%. Okay, it's a safe requirement. Maintainability, reliability, scalability, performance, usability, and flexibility. You have all the types of non-function requirements, and all of them is not a feature, okay, but is constraints, but all of them constrains the way that the system will run. If you summarize the function, non-function requirements in the dashboard, it's something like that. Function requirement is about the product features. Non-function requirements is about the product properties. Function requirements is about the user requirements. Non-function requirements is about user expectation. Maybe you have this question. Oh, but there is a case that security is a function requirement. Who can answer? Are there one case, or are there any case that one security, for example, is a function requirement? What you think? I rephrase my question. Are there any case where you have where security is not a non-function requirement, but it's a function requirement? Who can provide me who can provide me an example of this situation?
Like, for example, the system must provide a security report.
Can you repeat the end of your phrase?
Yeah, for example, the system must provide a security report.
Yes. For example, another example is the product that you develop is a security product. Okay, like a file or like a cipher or any other security application. In this case, the feature is the security, okay? For example, the bank application. When you develop a bank application, security is not a constraint. Security is a feature. Is inside the. You have specific security requirements that is function requirement. For example, cipher. You have a secure connection. It's not a constraint. Well, it's a real. What you define that you function requirement or non-function requirements. Again, it's a property or it's a feature. If it's a feature, it's a function. It's not a property, it's a non-function. For example, it is an expectation of the user. For example, I would like that my application, the application that you develop is beautiful. It's not beautiful, okay? You use more specific words, but beautiful. It's about the expectation. It's not about what the system needs to do. It's about usability most of the time. Usability most of the time is non-function requirement because it's an expectation. I expect that the system is easy to use. There is no feature about it. Do you understand the difference between the non-function to function requirements? Yeah. So now you understood what is a function, what is a requirement, and in particular, what is a function and what is non-function requirement. The next step is how is state requirements, how to get requirements, okay? And you need to define, to state requirements. First, you need to think in one thing. What is the proposal of the system? In other words, what is inside the system? The second thing is, what is outside? What is the proposal of the system? You define the border, okay? And when you define the border, you can identify what is outside and what is inside the system. Maybe it's so abstract to you, but it's very important. Think about, for example, I contract you to develop an application, smart app to run my cell phone, okay? And the first thing that you need to define with the user is, okay, you want to develop an app to Android, to iPhone, or to both. Okay? You need to define the purpose of the system. Oh, I want to Android. Is to Android? Okay. It means that iPhone is outside. It's not my scope. I want to define, and it's important. So change the idea. Things that the user said, oh, I want to design to iPhone. The system don't need to run Android. In this situation, you define, for example, you can develop this application using a native language to iPhone. But if the user said, oh, it's to both, you use a more generalistic language. Okay? Defining what's the proposal of the system is very important to avoid to develop things that the user don't want. And when you define the proposal, you can identify what's inside and what's outside to avoid to develop things that you don't need. Okay? But what is a required station? A required station is the practice or research and discover the requirement of the system from user, customers, and other stakeholders. It's important because it's a researching and discovering task. It's not deterministic. It's not art, but it's close to the art. You have a techniques to code things, but experience is a thing that is very important to real estate requirements. Most of the companies, the guy that is responsible to real estate requirements is experienced guys, because it's not easy to identify, to real estate correct requirements. There is a lot of noise in the requirement station, and I explained which type of noise you have. But first, the ways that you can elicit requirements, the first is the questionnaires. The questionnaires is a good technique that you can use, for example, to make a first elicitation, okay? Or at the end of the process. In the beginning of the process, it's very good when you have a very heterogeneous users. For example, you develop a system that is related to the complete company, a different sector company, for example, HR, the financials guys, the technical guys, and which of this group, okay, has specific vocabulary. For example, the HR, they use words, okay, technical words that is completely different than, for example, the IT guys. In this case, it's very important to, before you go to a meeting with the complete group, you create questionnaires, and using this questionnaire to try to clarify this difference between one vocabulary to others, or the one expectation to others. For example, the expectation when you implement, for example, one ROP system or the enterprise system in a company is completely different than the expectation to the engineer guys, okay? The questionnaire is a very, very useful tool to initiate this talk with the user. Because when the user return the questionnaire, you can analyze this questionnaire and prepare for a meeting, a face-to-face meeting, okay? Again, the questionnaire is very important at the end of this process, because you can use questionnaire to validate what you identify and try to validate in the multiple type of users. Again, you use questionnaire because you have a different type of user. You have the technical, you have the financial, you have HR, you have the managed, you have the technicals guys. You use questionnaire because you can work with segment of the company with using specific words. At the end, the use of the questionnaire is a little different. Use questionnaire to validate that you do the things that you understood about the specific sectors. You can summarize in one specification, and you can use questionnaires to validate. Another good technique is to text analysis. There are a lot of companies that has formal process, okay, formal business process or formal task process, okay. The company has a form that describes what the user, that the employee need to do. If the company has this type of document or this type of input, it's a good idea to require these documents and analyze this document, because you have, maybe it's not the way that the company works, but it's the way that the company wants to work, because it's the way that they describe the task. Scenarios and use case is a very close. The difference is the level of abstraction. It's a good idea to use scenarios like, for example, what you do or what you expect that the system needs to do when this situation happens, okay? You provide to the user scenarios, and the user needs to develop how they fix the problem that you present in scenarios, and explain the output that you want, or what is the expectation about that situation, okay? Scenario is very good. Again, scenario use case, the scenario is a very applied situation. You're modeling a real situation in the scenario, in the system, in the environment that the user has. use case, most of the time, you create a very abstract scenarios in the environment that the user wants to have, but the user does not have, okay? It's a group of activities that you can use to elicit requirements. But requirement stage is not a easy test. Instead, it's a very hard test. Because why? The first is communication is not accurate. Again, I will talk. People with different backgrounds must collaborate to bring the gap between the users and developers. The first gap is users and developers use different backgrounds. Okay, it's the reason that software engineering research try to develop tools to describe things like WML, like CML. Okay, is a modern language that the research try to create a language that is common to user and to developers. But inside the client team, you have a different background. One example, what means a task to HR guys and to develop guys is completely different, okay? And this difference can generate noise in the requirements elicitation. Another thing is client and users have application domain knowledge. When you develop a tool or a system to a client, external client, the external client has a domain knowledge. Word, for example, you develop a system to an electricity utility company. The electricity utility company has a background, has a domain knowledge. And you, as a developer, you need to understand the domain knowledge that this company has. But you don't have years to understand. You have maybe 1 month or 2 months to understand. Okay? So it's a problem that generates a lot of uncertainty in the communication. Second is identify appropriate system, or in other words, define the bordering. The bordering is a very, very, very important task in the system requirement, in the requirement station. Because if you didn't identify the system bordering correctly, you have two big problems. The first is you develop things that you don't need. And the second is more important because maybe in the finalization or the acceptation of the system, you discover a surprise, something like, oh, you didn't develop it, but you answer, but you didn't ask it to do develop. I asked it, you didn't understand. Okay, it's the reason that the system boundary need to be described and need to be exactly, you need to describe exactly what you do. So this cartoon here summarizes what is the problems about the requirement station. Pay attention. So the first picture is how the customer explain the problem. Okay, because you need to talk what you want to you need to ask to the user. Oh, what you want that I need to do. Oh, it's the thing that the user described. Second is how the project leader or who is responsible to requirement station understood what the user said. And when you go to the engineer, is how the engineer designed what the user said. And here is how you implement it. Next, you have how the sales executive describe the system. Okay, the guys that sell the system. It's a bad situation. How the project was documented. And what the operation installed. Okay, the user wants it, but how is the current situation in the company? How the customer was billed? How the help desk supported? But finally, what the user wants? The user wants a very simple object, but he described a complex one. And during all the process, you at the end, because it is the things that you develop, okay? At the end, you didn't accomplish what the user wants. And the consequence, if you didn't really specify correctly the system, the consequence is most of the time you build much more than it's required because you consider that it will be happen. It's the risk that you have in the development. And because you have this risk, you build a lot. The reason to the software engineering research development methodology is to reduce the risk and become cheaper, the software. Is there reduce the risk that the user described wrong, you model it and implement wrong what the user wants. Did you understand this picture?
Yes, teacher.
Okay. Some examples of problems during the specification stage. The first is ambiguous specification. Think in this example here. During a laser experiment, a laser beam was directed from Earth to a mirror on the Space Shuttle Discovery. The laser beam was supposed to be reflected back towards a mountain top 10,033 feet high. Okay? The operator entered the elevation 10023. However, the light beam never hit the mountain top. What happens? The computer interpreting in the miles. However, the specification is in the feet. It's a very common problem. I will show one example of this problem here. Give me a second. Okay. Did you hear about this problem here? What happened here is, in 1999, NASA lost 125 millions in Mark climate orbit because the spacecraft engineer failed to convert from English to metric measures when exchanged vital data before craft was launched. What happened is the spacecraft, a NASA spacecraft, thinks that for example, thinks that is a 1,000 feet is the distance to land. Okay. However, is 1,000. Sorry, thinks it is 1,000 meters, but it's 1,000 feet. Okay. And in other words, 1,000 feet is 300 meters, and the aircraft thinks that is high and it's close to the ground and crash. Because this problem, you lost $125 million and a lot of time, because to create this type of mission, you need to prepare years before, and you need to consider that to travel, the travel spend 1-2 years to go to Earth to Mars. You spend a lot of time and a lot of money. And the problem happens because it's crazy, because a very stupid problem, conversion between English to metric measures. Okay. If you go to the Google, you can find better this idea. You can find videos that explain in detail this type of this situation. Okay, this case. Okay. So again, this problem is not only it's a academic problem. It happened in the past. Another problem is a very amazing case because it's true too. It happens in London, okay, underground train. And the problem is London underground train leaves station without driver. What happens? A passenger door was stuck, it is not closed, okay? And the system has a sensor that identifies the situation, okay? The driver left, the system alert to the driver left his train, okay, to close the passenger door. And the driver left the driver door open, okay? It's the key, okay? The driver when left his position, keep his door open, okay? Why did he keep the door open? Because if he closed the door and you close the user door, the system that outdoor is closed. The train can leave the station. Okay. Religion specification that said the train does not move if at least one door is open, and it's the reason that he left his door open. Okay. But when he shut the passenger door, the train left the station without him. Fix this situation. You are in the train, okay, sitting in Mexico City train, okay, and the train starts to move to another station. But there is no drive. There is a move in the, it's a very old move, but it's a very famous move. And what's the name in English? Give me a second. Is let's check here. Uh, okay. After the city two. Did you see this movie? Your dad, I believe yes, but you already see this movie. It's a old move. It's this guy here. Okay. Is this actor here? Okay, it's a very famous actor. Old actors did a lot of comedy movies like I don't know the name in English, but in the maybe in the Spanish sake, it's like a pastelon. Oh my gosh, my camera. What happens? Okay, I'm back. Okay, it's like a very comedy, very lazy comedy is this movie here. The history of this movie, the pilot is not inside the aircraft, and the aircraft starts to fly. Okay, and the people start discover that there is no pilot, and the history happens because it. Okay, but in this case, it's not a move. It happened in the past. Okay, it's really happened. Where's my pointer now? Oh my gosh. Where is my pointer? Okay, my pointer here. Okay, it's really happened. What happens? The reason that the door, the train left the station without the pilot or the driver, it's because The driver door was not treated as a door in the source code. The driver door does not have any sensor that identifies that is open or closed. Okay? It's not an ambiguous requirement. It's an unintended feature. It's very common, for example, today in the security. When you design a system, you need to think about security because the attacker tried to use a feature that you have in your system, but you didn't think how, the way that you attack is a different way to use the feature. It's like what happens here in this case here in the London. Okay. So, any questions you hear, guys? Okay. Summarize. You need to think about requirements because first, requirement state is not a easy task. Okay, it's a very complex task because you have a lot of uncertainty related to the communication and related to the domain. Okay, you need to get from the user. You need to get the user the things that you want to do. The system needs to do is the function requirements and the constraints about the, or in other words, the expectation that he has about the system. And the requirement station is not easy because you have a lot of uncertainty communication. It's the summarization of we learning to here. Now we start to know about the how to report a requirement. Again, there are different ways to report requirement. There are different ways to write a requirement. Okay. For example, if you use agile developer that we use it in the next week we start to learning. We'll have we'll teach about the how to organize the project. Okay, using an agile perspective. Okay, agile perspective is you spend time coding the things that your user wants. Is the main idea about the agile. The other approach, the focus is you need to design the system, but you need to document a lot the system. You need to describe well the system, okay? And what happens when you use the legacy approach, you have a very well document system, but you don't have time to implement things, okay? In other words, you have a good document, but you don't have a good code. It's the summarization. We will teach you about how to report requirements using user store. Before the user store, you have the legacy requirements. Okay, what it means. In the previous methodology, you have remember the first phase, requirement station. We spend a long time in the requirement station because you need to discover exactly what the system needs to do. The bordering, the constraints. You need to define everything about the system, about the requirement in the beginning of the process. But what happens in the real world is, in the beginning of the process, the user does not have a very stable idea about what he wants. For example, you want a new e-commerce system, okay? And in the beginning, you capture the information about the e-commerce system and describe in detail. Oh, the process is the process, exactly the process is the way that the user validate the transactions. However, when you start to develop the system and the user start to see what you develop, the user has a new idea. He see the things that you design. Maybe you can do it different. Oh, I didn't understand. Oh, now I understand, exactly understand what I want. I would like to change. To avoid this situation, the agile perspective thinks, okay, first, I need to have focus in the user, what the user wants, what is important to the user, what aggregates value to the user, is the first thing. The second is, the user does not know exactly what we want in the beginning of the project. The user needs to, as the developer needs to mature, increase the maturity related to the what he developed, the user need to be uh, maturate the requirements or what you want. You need to think better, okay? And the idea is you describe, specify the requirements and functionality of the application. First, in the perspective of the user customer, what aggregates values. And the second, you don't spend time a lot trying to describe in detail the requirements. You just only try to, okay, what you want? I want it. Okay. In the future, when I start to design or start to develop this feature, we need to talk again. And in this talk, you need to describe better what you want. Okay. What the user story is a requirement in the perspective of the user, and it is a promise of the future conversation. Okay. You the user story don't have any unnecessary requirement, any necessary detail. Okay. Because you only try to describe quickly the requirements. It is the reason. In the beginning, you have a plan, but your initial plan, okay, is not better plan, it's the real plan, okay? And the real plan is not the line. You have a very thins or curves during the plan. And if you try to describe it as a line and the real system is not a line, probably you need to refactor, you need to rework a lot during the process. So it's the idea is capture it only the knowledge. And during the process, you increase the knowledge, the skills that you have about the problem, and detail the requirements. Okay. And the reason is you don't know exactly what you need to do. You don't know how you do, and will you do. For example, for instance, insistent that you have a part that involves artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence developer is not a cheap type of work. You don't have a one for each project. Most of the time, you have one that you share with different projects. Maybe you don't have this guy in the beginning of the project, and you need to have this guy to discuss with the user about the functionalities, about the artificial intelligence functionality. Okay, so it's the reason that you use user store because you don't want to spend a lot of time to describe these things. Who writes user store? The analyst and the users. Okay, and uh, I only present two slides and make a break. Okay, user story is a short, simple, and clear. Okay, short, simple, clear, and you identify it here. It's an example of user story. As a customer who drives, I want to find a conveniently located range so that I can minimize drive time. In a user story, you need to describe who, what, and why. Okay. In other words, who, what, and why. Who and what is important? Who is responsible to implement or to use the feature that you develop? The feature is the what, and the why. It's important to define the priority. Okay, the why defines the priorities of the requirement. Okay, uh, I will give a break, and after the break, you have another examples about the user store. Okay, but for now, you have 2 minutes here. We are having 2 minutes. Did you understand what is a user store? What you need to develop here? Who can answer? What you need to implement here? Leah, can you answer?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is, what you need to implement in this user store here?
In the sentence below, right?
No, what you need to implement, you need to implement a feature that's enabled that you find a conveniently located branch. Okay, for example, it's one requirement to a map system that you have, for example, things that is a bank system. Is a feature that you have a button that you need to that you provide to a user to find a ATM, for example. Okay, this feature is about a feature that you implement to find a convenient location branch. Who is the guy that you use this feature? Leah.
A customer.
The customer. And why you need this feature?
So that he can minimize driving time.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the things. The user store describe a feature that you have. It's to who is the client or the customer, what is the find a conveniently located branch, why? To minimize the drive time. Okay. Okay. The next time I ask for another people. Okay. I ask for to not to check. Okay. It's only to see if you understood exactly what I said. Okay. So after the break, I will give you a break. We return 10:10, and after the break, we will continue. Okay, guys. See you soon.